When the call from the bank came that morning, I thought it was a mistake. The woman's voice was polite, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Daniels, I'm sorry, but your account balance is negative. The overdraft has been triggered." For a moment, I just sat there, one hand still dusted with flour, the smell of warm croissants curling through the air, staring at the phone like I hadn't heard right. Negative, overdraft. Those words didn't belong in my life. Not after all the years I'd spent building Sunrise Bakes, my little cafe on the corner of Willow and 3rd. But life has a cruel way of flipping the script right when you think you found peace. Before the storm, my world was simple. Every morning, I'd unlock the glass door at 6 a.m., the bell chiming softly, a sound that became the rhythm of my life. The air would be thick with the smell of yeast, butter, and coffee. My staff, 2 college girls and my cousin June, would shuffle in, laughing, sleepy but loyal. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every tiled wall, every chair polished by 1,000 elbows. All of it had come from my savings, my sweat, my heart. When I married Martin 5 years earlier, he wasn't part of the cafe yet. He was charming then, the kind of man who made everyone laugh at dinner parties, who'd take your hand in public and say, "This woman's the reason I believe in luck." He worked in finance, always dressed sharp, always had a new idea to optimize something. I used to think we balanced each other, me with my small-town stubbornness, him with his city-bred ambition. But love can blur your eyes in ways hindsight makes cruelly clear. At first, Martin would drop by the cafe in the afternoons, bringing me lunch or sitting with a laptop while I closed the register. "Babe, you're doing great," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "You just need structure. Systems. You can't run a business on heart alone." I laughed at that then. Heart was all I had. Still, he had ideas that worked. He designed a proper website, helped me apply for a better supplier, even made a point-of-sale system that tracked every muffin sold. I was grateful, proud even. People started calling us the power couple, but little shifts began to creep in, quiet and slow, like water seeping through a crack you don't see until the wall buckles. He began referring to the cafe as our business, then his. One evening, as I wiped down the counters after closing, he came in holding a folder. His tone was easy, too easy. "Lena, I've been talking to a friend about your setup. He says it's risky that everything's under your name. Liability issues, you know? If someone sues, your personal assets could be at stake." I frowned. "But no one's suing us, Martin. And it's my cafe. It's registered, insured. You helped with that paperwork yourself." He sighed, the way someone sighs at a child who doesn't understand the world yet. "I know, baby. I'm just saying, it'd be smarter to transfer ownership temporarily. I can shield it under my LLC. You'll still be in charge day to day." "It's just paperwork." I hesitated, but he wrapped an arm around me, kissed my hair, and whispered, "Trust me." I'd never do anything to hurt you, that line. I'd replay it in my head for months later. The night I signed the papers, it rained hard. I remember because the windows of our kitchen fogged up, and the candle between us flickered in the draft. I didn't read all the fine print, not really. The words blurred in the soft yellow light, and his hand was warm on my shoulder. He poured me wine, told me this was just formalizing what we'd already built together. When it was done, he grinned, lifted his glass. To us. Partners in life and business. I smiled too. I wanted to believe him. The weeks after that, nothing seemed to change, at least not at first. The cafe still opened, the staff still laughed, and I still balanced the books every night. But Martin began managing things more often. He said he wanted to handle supplier negotiations. Then he took over payroll to streamline costs. He stopped asking my opinion about small things, prices, decor, even the menu. The day he replaced my chalkboard specials with a digital screen, I felt a strange emptiness settle inside me. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about control. When I asked, he said, "You've got to modernize, Lena. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Everything about that cafe was personal. The first real crack came when I tried to order new coffee machines. The supplier emailed back saying the account was frozen. Martin had changed the authorization. When I asked him about it that night, he shrugged. "Oh, I moved funds around." "Don't worry, it's just accounting." "Accounting," I repeated. "Martin, I need those machines this week." He smiled, that patronizing smile that once charmed me, but now felt like a knife. "Relax. You stress too much over details. I didn't sleep that night." A month later, one of my baristas came running to me mid-shift. whispering that a man in a suit was taking photos outside. He was from a real estate agency. Apparently, my cafe was listed for sale. I laughed at first, a hollow, shocked laugh that didn't sound like mine. "There's no way," I said. "There must be a mistake." But when I called Martin, his tone was calm, detached. "I was going to tell you tonight," he said. "It's the right move, Lena. We can cash out, invest in something bigger. You've outgrown this place." My heart dropped. "Martin, you can't just sell it. This cafe, it's my life." "No, Lena," he said evenly. "It's our asset. Legally mine." For a moment, the world tilted. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the clinking of cups, June whispering my name. But his words drowned everything. Legally mine. I tried to reason with him, plead even, but he'd already made up his mind. A week later, I walked by and saw a sold sign on the window. Just like that, the home I'd built from dreams and 5 a.m. shifts was gone. He left 2 days after that, took his things, left a note. No apology, just a list of assets and debts with my name still tied to the business's loans, and that was when the bank called. When I hung up the phone that morning, my hands were shaking so badly that the mug of coffee tipped and spilled across the counter. Dark liquid spread over the unpaid bills like a slow bruise. I just stood there, staring at the mess, until the smell of burnt toast snapped me back. That's what grief does. It catches you in small, ordinary moments. You think you're fine, and then something simple breaks you open again. The cafe was gone, Martin was gone, and I was in debt so deep I could barely breathe. For weeks, I moved like a ghost. The house felt colder without him, not because of his absence, but because of what he'd left behind. Silence, confusion, humiliation. Neighbors whispered. Customers who'd once greeted me with warmth now asked awkwardly, "So what really happened?" I didn't have answers then. All I had were questions and a dull ache that kept me awake at night. June, my cousin, was the one who forced me to start eating again. She'd come over with soup and cornbread, setting it down without asking. "You can't fall apart now," she'd say. "He's already taken enough." Sometimes I wanted to yell at her, tell her I was tired of being strong, but I didn't. I just nodded, spooned the soup into my mouth, and tried to taste something other than bitterness. About a month after Martin left, I found a letter wedged behind one of our photo albums. It wasn't addressed to me, just folded neatly with my name written on the back in his tidy handwriting. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an apology. It was a transaction list. Notes about the cafe's sale, bank transfers, and something called a marital asset restructuring. I didn't understand most of it, but one line stood out like a wound. Greater than transfer of primary liabilities remains under Lena's personal credit until fiscal closure. In plain words, it meant I owed everything. He had walked away free, clean even, while I carried the debt. That night, I opened the window and let the cold air slap my face. I whispered to the darkness, "You wanted a partner, Martin. You made me your victim instead," and for the first time in weeks, the anger began to surface. The next morning, I went to see an attorney. Her name was Dana, short, sharp, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice. After I laid everything on her desk, the sale documents, the emails, the letter, she sighed. "Lena," she said gently, "you signed over ownership. Legally, the cafe was his to sell." I swallowed hard. "So there's nothing I can do?" "Well," she leaned forward, "nothing about the sale. But if you can prove deceit, that he manipulated you, used your trust, you could sue for damages." I stared at her. "Sue my husband?" She didn't blink. "He made himself your business partner first, husband second." The truth of that sentence burned through me. I spent the next several weeks gathering everything I could. Old receipts, emails, even the text messages where he'd convinced me to sign. But the more I dug, the more I found out who Martin really was. He hadn't just sold the cafe, he'd been planning it for months. He'd taken loans against the business under my name, transferred assets to his own company, and even lied about taxes. It was a slow, cold horror, realizing the man I loved had orchestrated every detail while still kissing me goodnight. One email from his account broke me completely. It was to a real estate broker. The subject line read, "Selling wife's cafe, keep discreet." I remember sinking to the floor, clutching my phone, feeling my pulse pound in my ears. That was the night something inside me shifted from heartbreak to fury. June was the one who suggested I go public. "People trusted you, Lena," she said. "They deserved to know what he did. And maybe, Just maybe, he deserves to face that too. I didn't want revenge then, not yet. I wanted truth. So I wrote a post, nothing dramatic, just the facts. How the cafe had started, how I'd signed it over out of love, how it was sold without my knowledge. By morning, it had over 10,000 shares. Old customers, local businesses, even strangers flooded the comments with messages of support and stories of similar betrayals. It was humbling, but it was also fuel, because the more people talked, the more information surfaced. Someone sent me a photo of Martin at a business dinner with a woman I didn't recognize. Another message that he was pitching new ventures using my cafe's success story as his own. That was when I stopped crying and started planning. I decided to meet him, not to beg, not to plead, but to see the man who'd done this to me. He agreed surprisingly quickly, said he'd been meaning to clear the air. We met at a hotel lounge, the kind of place with soft jazz and too much cologne in the air. He looked different, tanned, confident, expensive. When he saw me, he smiled like nothing had happened. "Lena," he said smoothly, "you look good. I hope you're moving on." "Moving on?" I repeated, my voice trembling just slightly. "You stole my life, Martin." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't be dramatic. You made a poor business decision. I just took advantage of an opportunity. Happens every day." That sentence, "I just took advantage of an opportunity," it landed like a slap. I leaned forward, my voice steady now. "You didn't just take advantage of my business, Martin. You took advantage of my love." He smirked. "Love and business don't mix, sweetheart. You should have learned that by now." I stood up, heart pounding. "Maybe you're right," I said, "but I'm still learning how to fight." And I walked out. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel broken anymore. I felt focused, because if Martin believed he'd silenced me, he was about to learn that I still had a voice. The first thing I did the next morning was open my laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document, and for the first time in months, I felt purpose again. I began writing everything, every conversation, every signature, every gut feeling I had ignored. I dated each entry, gathered screenshots, receipts, and messages. It wasn't just evidence, it was a map of my own blindness. By the end of the week, I had a 60-page timeline that told a story far uglier than I could have imagined. Dana, my lawyer, flipped through the pages when I brought them to her. She nodded slowly, her expression grim. "This is strong," she said. "You've got proof of manipulation and fraud. We'll file a civil suit, emotional and financial damages. But Lena," she met my eyes, "it's not going to be easy." "He's slick. He'll play innocent." I smiled faintly. He's underestimated me before. While the legal gears began to turn, I focused on rebuilding. Not the cafe, that chapter was closed, but myself. At first, I tried working at a bakery downtown. It was humbling, kneading dough for someone else, wearing a uniform with another name embroidered on the chest. But there was something healing about it too. The rhythm of the mixer, the smell of sugar melting in butter, the quiet nods of early morning customers. Still, every time I wiped the counter, I imagined my old cafe, the chalkboard, the laughter, the place that used to be mine. That memory didn't hurt as much anymore. It just reminded me of who I used to be and who I wanted to become again. A few months passed before the court date arrived. I hadn't seen Martin since that hotel meeting, though I'd heard things. That he was living with that woman, that he'd started a new consulting firm, that he bragged about teaching his ex-wife how business works. I didn't care about gossip. What I wanted was accountability. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, a simple navy suit, my hair tied back. Not to impress, but to remind myself, I am not broken. When I walked into the courthouse, the smell of paper and polish filled the air. He was already there. Martin sat with his lawyer, wearing that same smug confidence that used to charm investors. When our eyes met, he gave me a small, mocking smile, as if to say, "This will be fun." The proceedings were long, exhausting, filled with jargon and legal technicalities. His side tried to paint me as an emotional entrepreneur who lacked financial literacy. I almost laughed when they said that. Then it was my turn. Dana guided me through every question, calm and precise. We showed the emails, the ones where he promised temporary transfer for legal protection. We showed the text where he said, "You'll always own it in spirit, sweetheart." But the moment that changed everything came when Dana displayed a printout of that email. Greater than "Selling Wife's Café. Keep discreet." The courtroom went still. Martin's lawyer stammered something about informal phrasing, but the damage was done. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. When I stepped down from the stand, Martin wouldn't meet my eyes. After that day, something in the air shifted. He stopped showing up to hearings. His lawyer began requesting extensions. Word spread that his consulting firm had lost investors. One afternoon, I got an email from a former colleague of his. "He's drowning," she wrote. "People are pulling out after reading your story online. They say you've shown real grace. Keep going, Grace." That word stayed with me, because through it all, I hadn't once screamed, slandered, or lashed out. I just told the truth, calmly, clearly, persistently, and somehow truth had done what revenge never could. When the judgment finally came months later, I sat in my kitchen alone, listening to the rain tapping against the window. The same sound I remembered from the night I signed those cursed papers. Only this time, I wasn't afraid. The court awarded partial restitution, not the full amount I'd lost, but enough to clear the debts he'd left me with. More importantly, the judgment cited intentional deception and abuse of trust. Those words meant more than money ever could. Martin didn't appeal. He disappeared quietly, like a storm that had spent its fury. I took a long breath, closed my eyes, and let the relief wash over me. I wasn't naive anymore, but I also wasn't bitter. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. It was June who nudged me toward my next step. She dropped by one morning carrying a box of old recipe cards, smudged with flour and years of memories. "I found these in Aunt Ruth's attic," she said. "Remember when she used to make those honey biscuits? Maybe it's time you started again." I looked at the cards, the faded ink, the notes in the margins, and something sparked inside me. A month later, I rented a tiny space at the farmer's market. Just a table, a banner, and an oven borrowed from a friend. I called it Second Sunrise. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. Every weekend, I sold pastries to people who wanted to hear my story. Some had followed the legal case online, others just liked the food. They'd say things like, "You're the woman who started over," or "You remind me that it's never too late." And every time I'd smile, because that's exactly what I needed to hear too. By spring, Second Sunrise grew beyond the market. I partnered with a local community center to teach small business workshops, especially for women who'd been through financial manipulation or betrayal. One evening after class, a young woman lingered behind. She twisted her bracelet nervously before saying, "My boyfriend wants me to sign my business over to him, just for tax reasons." I thought it was love, but then I read your story. I reached for her hand. "Love should never require you to surrender what you built," I said softly. "If it does, it isn't love, it's control." She nodded, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Thank you." That moment felt like healing, not just for her, but for me. Sometimes I still dream of the old cafe, the bell over the door, the hum of the espresso machine, the morning light falling through the window. But when I wake up, I don't feel loss anymore. I feel gratitude, because the woman who built that cafe was strong, but the woman who lost it fought for herself and rebuilt from nothing. She's unbreakable. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in quiet mornings, like the one I'm sitting in now, sunlight pooling across my kitchen table, the smell of cinnamon drifting from the oven. It's been 2 years since the court case ended. 2 years since I stood in that cold, sterile room and faced the man who once swore he loved me more than anything. And yet, I can finally say, I'm at peace. Second Sunrise has grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as a folding table at the farmer's market is now a full cafe again. Small, warm, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. On the wall behind the counter hangs a framed photo of my first cafe, the one I lost. Beneath it, a handwritten note says, "Not everything stolen is gone forever. Some things are reborn. People come in for coffee and biscuits, but they stay to talk. They tell me their stories of loss, betrayal, and rebuilding. Some cry, some just sit quietly, stirring their drinks, as if the sound of the spoon against porcelain is its own kind of therapy. I listen, always, because I remember how it felt when no one listened to me. There's one customer who visits every Friday morning, a retired teacher named Miss Agnes. She once told me, "I like coming here because you pour peace into your pastries." I laughed when she said it, but she wasn't wrong. Every loaf, every cookie, every cup I serve carries a piece of my forgiveness, not for Martin, but for myself. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about releasing the weight of what you can't change. But there are moments still when the past brushes against my life like a cold wind. It happened one evening last winter. The cafe had closed early due to the snow, and I was wiping the counters when I saw a familiar figure through the window. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. But no, it was Martin. He looked older, thinner. His hair had grayed, and his once crisp posture seemed to have collapsed in on itself. He stood outside for a long moment before finally pushing the door open. The bell chimed softly, that same sound that used to mark the start of my mornings years ago. "Lena," he said quietly. His voice was rough, as if he hadn't used it much lately. "Martin," I kept my tone even. "What brings you here?" He glanced around the cafe, the lights, the plants, the warm hum of the heater. "This place," he smiled faintly, "it's beautiful. Reminds me of what you sold?" I asked, not cruelly, but firmly. He nodded. His eyes glistened for a moment. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air like fragile glass. I waited, not because I needed to hear more, but because I wanted to see if he truly understood what he'd done. He sighed. "I thought I was helping. I thought I could handle it better, but I was wrong. I ruined everything I studied him for a long time. Once, those same eyes could convince me of anything. Now, I could see the emptiness behind them." "Martin," I said softly, "you didn't ruin everything. You ruined what we had, but everything, that's still mine to rebuild." He nodded, a faint tremor in his hands. "You look happy." "I am," I said simply. He looked down, then turned to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "You always were the stronger one," he murmured. Then he stepped out into the snow and the door closed behind him. I stood there for a long moment, watching his footprints disappear into the white. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt closure. That night, I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The snow fell in soft waves, and I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been. The dreamer, the wife, the fool, the fighter, the survivor. Each version had cost me something, but each one had given me something too. People think betrayal destroys you, but sometimes it strips away everything false until all that's left is truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is a foundation you can rebuild on. 6 months later, I hosted a small event at the cafe, a women in business night. The room filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of stories being shared. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the counter, the same place where I once cried over lost contracts and shattered trust. I told them about the business, the betrayal, and the bankruptcy, but mostly I told them about the courage that comes after the fall, the quiet, relentless kind that shows up each morning to try again. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone began to clap. Soon the whole cafe joined in. And in that applause, I felt something deep shift inside me, like a wound finally closing. Later that night, as I locked up, I turned off the lights one by one. The last glow came from the neon sign in the window. Second sunrise. I stood there a moment, watching the reflection of my face in the glass, not the woman who lost everything, but the one who gained herself back. I smiled, and I whispered almost to myself, "Sometimes life takes what you love to show you what you're made of." I often wonder, if I could go back, would I still sign those papers? Would I hand over everything I built to the man I loved, knowing how it would end? Maybe I would, because without that heartbreak, I might never have learned who I really am. People think betrayal is the end of a story, but I've learned it's often the beginning of a new one. If you've ever lost something to someone you trusted, I want you to remember this. You are not defined by what was taken from you. You are defined by what you choose to build next. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the weight of someone else's choices. And love, real love, will never ask you to surrender your dreams. So to anyone listening tonight, if you're standing in the ashes of something you built, don't rush to rebuild it the same way. Start again, wiser, stronger, and this time entirely on your own terms. Because sometimes the second sunrise is more beautiful than the first.